Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with Essential Works by Composer X for Beginners. Well, the Composer X is Haydn. Oh, this is a toughie for me because I adore Haydn. As you know, I'm doing the Haydn Symphony Crusade. We're chugging our way through all 107 or 8 or however many there are Haydn symphonies. He is the father of the symphony, the father of the string quartet, the father of classical music as we know it from the classical period on. His importance is not, relatively speaking, matched by his popularity, which I find incomprehensible because he is one of the most purely enjoyable composers that ever existed. He really is. But his music offers a combination of formal daring, intellectual depth, and emotional intensity, which it's hard for some people to come to grips with. It really is. And there's so much of it. There's tons of it. He had a much wider range than some of us know or would admit from the few works of his that tend to be popular. So here's the list. 10 works in varied media, and I'm going to do my best to explain why they're essential and why you're going to love every single one of them because, oh my God, they're marvelous. First, Symphony No. 88. Now, Symphony No. 88 doesn't have a nickname. It actually used to have a nickname, the letter V, but nobody knows why it had that nickname or what it had to do with anything, so it no longer has a nickname. It's just Symphony No. 88. And these, people tend to like the ones with nicknames because they're easier to remember, like The Surprise, which you can certainly go listen to. But 88 is the most perfect classical symphony anybody ever wrote. Plain and simple. It is tuneful. It's irresistibly catchy. Its slow movement, the Largo, has one of the most beautiful tunes in the entire classical era. It has everything a symphony should have. It has amazing developmental stuff going on in it. That is, the more you listen to it, the more you hear, the more it begins to cohere organically, the more all the movements relate to each other. It has a gorgeous tone poem in the middle of the minuet, a pastoral scene with bagpipes and birds chirping. It has a finale with one of the most unforgettable tunes in the universe. And the whole thing is based on that tune with counterpoint, the tune chasing itself like around at one point. It's unbelievable. So start with 88. Just start and let it roll over you. And I am sure you're going to be hooked. So after that, we need to do another symphony here. I mean, because we have to do symphonies. They're so marvelous. Number 101, The Clock. The Clock Symphony is named after its slow movement. Haydn was so popular and so good at what he was doing that a lot of his slow movements gave not only their nicknames to the symphonies, but they were encored at the first performance. And the Clock Symphony is called that because the second movement tick-tocks. It goes tuck, 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 tuck. And there's a tune on top of it. Ya-da-dum, bum, ba-da-da-da-da-dum. This is a wonderful example of Haydn's amazing sense of humor. He is one of the very few composers who was funny. And he could be funny in a billion different ways, from drollery to low humor. There's a bassoon fart in the slow movement of Symphony No. 33. Most people think that funny has to be fast. Haydn could be funny in slow movements. And he is in this one because it's that tick-tock rhythm. Just listen to what he does with it and how it comes in when he scores it for a low bassoon and a high flute. So it's going boom, eek, boom, eek. Well, it's loud, it's soft. Everything he does with this clock rhythm that just steadily ticks on below this really, really puckish. That's the word. It's a puckish tune, a droll, witty tune. It's an amazing movement, but the whole symphony is fabulous. The whole thing is, but I think it's interesting to listen to just to show you that the weight of the symphony, the interest of the symphony can be distributed in many, many different ways. And not that the rest of it is any less interesting, but that clock movement is I mean, Haydn designed it to be the focal point, and the rest of the work is constructed around it to complement and satisfy you, even though there are two movements after and one before. It's a remarkable thing to listen to, and you're going to have a great time with it. But think of the humor. And if something sounds funny in Haydn, it is. It's funny. Haydn is funny, and he really is in the Clock Symphony. Next, string quartets. Now, string quartets are very serious. They're chamber music, as you know, and they're supposed to be, magnificently cerebral and intellectual. And sometimes they are, and sometimes they aren't. But the string quartet in F minor, which is this one, comes from his Opus 20, number 5. Opus 20 means work number 20, and this particular group of works, in this case, Opus 20, has 6 string quartets. Most of Haydn's string quartets came out in groups of 6 or groups of 3. Even the ones that are in groups of 3, he actually intended as groups of 6, but they were published differently. This is the series of string quartets that invented the classical string quartet, that most sublime orchestral ensemble work medium in the history of music. It's an extraordinarily beautiful piece and a deep piece, profound. I mean, really, but I say that not to be sarcastic. I mean, deeply emotional, expressive, lyrically intense, gorgeous music. Gorgeous music. I mean, really, really, really beautiful. And it ends with a fugue. A fugue. Very, very intellectual, but also another piece that has a certain austerity to it, a seriousness about it that people don't often credit Haydn with having. And you should, because he does. It's a glorious piece of music. The slow movement is quite simply one of the most beautiful lyrical songs or arias for solo violin that you'll ever hear in your life. It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. And this is an early work comparatively for Haydn. I mean, Haydn was a late starter. He didn't write his first symphony till he was about 27, 28. And these quartets are some of the most important and beautiful, beautiful in the history of Western music. So you should listen to all 6 of them at some point, but start with the F minor. It's a major, major work. And Haydn thought so. He really did. He played it for his elder contemporary Gluck, who was the great operatic reformer in Vienna in the 1760s and 70s. And Haydn trucked on over to Gluck's house and said, "Listen to this, my new quartet." And Gluck said, "Whoa, that's terrific." And he was right. So there's that. And now, after that, his number 4 in this list of 10, we need to talk about Haydn's vocal music. He's not known as a composer for vocal music except for his late masses and oratorios, and we'll get to that in a minute. But he wrote a huge range of sacred music. He was a deeply religious person, a devout Catholic, a happily devout Catholic. He said thinking of God always made him cheerful. But in this work, he ain't so cheerful. This is his Stabat Mater. Now, the Stabat Mater is the poem offering the image of the Virgin Mary at the foot of the cross as her son Jesus lay dying, crucified, and she's weeping at the foot of the cross. It's a deeply moving prayer. And Haydn composed the work as an offering to the Virgin Mary on his recovery from a serious illness. It is the largest setting of this text before we get to Dvorak, who wrote an enormous Stabat Mater setting as well. But Haydn's is really major. It's almost an hour long. It's extremely, extremely deeply felt. The sincerity behind this music, its spiritual intensity is absolutely unmistakable. It's still very little known, but he thought very highly of it, and it meant a lot to him. And so it's an aspect of his character that you should get to know. And if you like sacred music, if you like choral music, then you're really going to find this extremely beautiful and a deeply moving experience. I guarantee it. And you'll be surprised it's coming from Haydn, because it's not the Haydn we usually get to hear. We usually get to hear, the light, happy guy. And he was light sometimes, and he was happy quite often, and he was funny and hysterically funny all the time. But not here. He could write seriously, he could write profoundly, and he could write with real religious depth. And it's an aspect of his character that it's worth getting to know, because it shows up everywhere. It's part of his style, his essence. So the Stabat Mater is a major, major work. Next, we're going to do another symphony, number 45, the Farewell Symphony. Now, the Farewell Symphony comes from what's called his Sturm und Drang period, storm and stress, the period where he was writing deeply agitated music in minor keys. And this one is in F sharp minor. It is the only symphony in F sharp minor until, like, Korngold in the 1940s or something. I mean, it's a very rare key and a very rare work, an extraordinary work, because it begins with enormous intensity and tension and angst and scariness, and it ends with what is effectively a joke. What happens is the music starts up like it's returning to the feeling, the atmosphere of that first movement, that tense first movement, after a very benumbed slow movement and a somewhat stern minuet. And then we have this allegro, and then it stops. The finale stops dead. And this beautiful slow movement opens up, and it goes round and round. And each time it comes round, a bunch of the players get up and leave until there's only two violins left. And then they stop, and that's how it ends, with those two tiny violins. The story being, of course, being very well known, that Haydn's patron, Prince Esterhazy, for whom he was writing all of this music, was always used to hang out at his castle in Hungary at Esterházy, a giant swamp of a castle built in the style of Versailles. And all the players wanted to go home because they couldn't bring their wives and children with them when they were at the summer palace. They had to stay home, all the families in Vienna. The orchestra was actually attached to the military establishment with the soldiers of the barracks. They ate in the barracks with the soldiers. And so Haydn wrote a symphony reminding the prince that his players really wanted to leave. And that's what happens at the end. The orchestra leaves. So it's a joke. But it's a sensitive joke, a subtle joke, a humor that is exquisitely beautiful at the same time that it's funny. It's not ha-ha. It's witty. It's delicious. And you should get to know it. It's just marvelous. So after the Sturm und Drang Farewell Symphony, we do another quartet from a little bit later on. His string quartet in C major, opus 54, number 2. I put this with the Farewell Symphony because it has another extraordinary ending that's a little bit like the finale of the Farewell, only it's not a joke. It is a slow movement. It's a slow movement with a fast interlude. It ends with a slow movement, an adagio, very rare in the classical period. But Haydn was so experimental. His handling of form was always new and fresh. He never repeated himself. And this quartet also has a second movement, a slow movement, that is amazing. It's a kind of what they call a pasacalia, meaning to walk through the streets in Spanish. But it was a Spanish dance that involves a repeated bass line over which stuff can happen. And this is a Hungarian pasacalia, and it has a dark twilight theme on the bass, while the solo violin plays a sort of Hungarian rhapsody kind of thing, a very rhapsodic solo line on top of it. There is nothing like it in all of music. And when you listen to it, to say to yourself, oh, this is written sometime in like the 1780s, you're just going to go, oh my God, it could have been written yesterday. It's timeless, absolutely timeless. It's amazing music. And so this is one of the great and most original of all of Haydn's string quartets. And it's quite short. It's about 20 minutes long. I mean, Haydn was a very compact composer. He put a lot of stuff into a small area. So I urge you to listen to this quartet too, and just sit back again and listen to it. And just don't think about 1700s. Just listen to it as something completely new. Its modernity is amazing. It just speaks to us like something that just appeared out of nowhere. It's amazing. It's amazing music. It really is. So after that, we're going to do a funny symphony. Symphony number 80 in D minor. Now, this is D minor, minor key, right? Scary, sad minor key. Well, not really. This is a funny symphony. The first movement is one of the funniest things Haydn ever wrote. It begins with sort of silent movie music. The Simon Legree or whatever his name is, the guy with the mustache, and he's tying up the heroine on the railroad tracks and the train's barreling towards her, and and then the music is all this sort of tense and crazy. It sounds like that at the beginning. It's like silent movie music. But as it moves on, it morphs into something else entirely. And I can't give away the joke because it's hilarious. You just listen to the tunes as Haydn presents them, and I dare you not to laugh. I saw a performance of this with Mstislav Rostropovich in the National Symphony of Washington, D.C. People don't do these middle Haydn symphonies, and they should because they're marvelous. And he performed it, and he had the audience in stitches after this first movement. The rest of the symphony actually has some very amusing things too, especially in its finale. But that first movement had people laughing out loud, which just goes to show that when you let people react naturally, respond the way, the music impels them to, then they get it. There's no trick here. Haydn is never someone who's trying to put one over on you. He has no tricks up his sleeve in the sense that he's trying to mystify or confound his listeners. He wants you to get the jokes. And if you allow yourself to do it, you'll get the jokes because they are really, really funny. And this symphony's first movement, it abounds in them. Next, Piano Trio number 39 in G major with the Gypsy Rondo, the Gypsy Rondo Trio. Yes, Hungarian folk music. Haydn was also one of the first composers who could be called a romantic nationalist, a composer who employed folk melodies in his music, and he either invented them or he borrowed them. And there are quite a few of them. And this particular piano trio is delicious. Haydn's piano trios are as good as unknown. And there are 40-something of them, and they are splendid, splendid works. A lot of them fall in the category of what they call accompanied sonatas. That is, they are piano sonatas with a violin and a cello to make the piano sing and have a firmer bass line, because the forte pianos of his day were rather thin in tone. But later on, he began to expand the medium and write with more independent violin parts and cello parts and whatnot, and turn them into more the classical piano trio as we know it today. But whether he did or he didn't, it's all great music. And this particular piece had a famous finale with Hungarian folk tunes all over the place. And it's another aspect of Haydn's inexhaustible character. He was almost the Mahler of his day. Remember, Mahler said the symphony must be the world. It has to embrace everything. Well, Haydn felt that way about his music generally. He found all kinds of musical objects and melodies and themes. And, he was totally open to the vast range of what music could be and what it could do. And that's a much better way to think about him than to say that, well, he's Papa Haydn, the father of the symphony, the father of the string quartet. I mean, whatever that means. You should think of him as an artist of unbelievable range and vision who saw the world of music entirely without prejudice, and who was willing to admit the widest range of materials into his works and turn them into organic wholes. Really extraordinary. And you see this again in the next work in our list, The 7 Last Words of the Savior on the Cross. This is Haydn's largest orchestral work in its original form. It exists in many forms, and we'll get to that in a second. But The 7 Last Words was written for an extremely unusual event, a Good Friday service in Spain, in which each of the 7 last sayings were phrases of the Savior on the cross was illustrated by a slow movement, an adagio, and had a sermon in between each one. And Haydn was like, how am I going to do this? It's like each one is 7 slow movements, preceded by a slow introduction, and then succeeded by an earthquake. The earthquake is fabulous, by the way. And this became Haydn's most popular work. It was a smash, and he couldn't believe it. He was like, wow, okay. But because it was self-evidently spiritual and spoke to so many people of all callings, basically, and it became so popular that it was arranged as a choral work, an arrangement that Haydn hated, so he made his own. There's an oratorio choral version of it. There's a string quartet version of it, and there's a piano sonata version of it. But the best version is the original orchestral one. And it is incredible to see how Haydn creates variety over such a long stretch of slow movement. Each one of these movements, which he calls sonatas, but they're, individual movements, begins with a tune which embodies the rhythm of Christ's words. You could set the words to the music. And it's really an extraordinary piece. Another example of Haydn's amazing ability to meet a challenge, first of all, and to write music of great spiritual depth and classical poise and beauty. And that earthquake, the earthquake, it invented the triple fortissimo at the end. F, 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 fortissimo. Really an extraordinary conclusion. And there's a reason for it, too. After all of that slow movement, he wants to wake you up. You've been in a spiritual reverie up to that point. Presumably in a darkened church after endless sermons, you may be in a serious reverie. You may be in like a near-death reverie. But what he's trying to do, of course, is reintroduce the quotidian world, the natural world, after all of that spiritual stuff that went on before. And it's really, I'm Jewish. I couldn't care less about the 7 last words of the Savior on the cross, to be honest with you. I mean, it's not my religion. The words themselves are beautiful. The tableau is deeply moving. The pictures that, you create, I mean, all of those things. It's a human story. That's how I see it. I see it as a work of extraordinary humanity and sentiment, and if it happens to be your faith, you may find something really deeply spiritual in it as well. However you take it, it's gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. And another aspect of Haydn's inexhaustible musical character. And last but not least, his great oratorio, The Creation. I mean, come on, what could be more amazing than The Creation set to music? And Haydn's oratorio is one of the only few that have survived after Handel's oratorios. He wrote it, inspired by having seen Handel's oratorios in London. It begins with the representation of chaos. It has so many incredible moments. It really encapsulates everything that makes Haydn Haydn. It has humor. It has the delicious picture of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden at the very end. It has the heavens are telling after each day of creation. You've got, animal noises and all the natural world as God is creating critters and things like that. You've got let there be light, and there was light. Yes, that incredible moment when the orchestra switches on light, it's like a light switch, like a spotlight, and it goes bang, and it blew everybody away back in 1790, whatever it was when he wrote it. And quite frankly, it still does. It's just as thrilling as the day Haydn wrote it. It's an incredible, incredible work. So when you have your time, I mean, it's about 2 hours long. Take your time. It's in 3 parts. Give yourself a chance to soak it all in. Like an opera, there's no rush for any of these things, actually. But this, for me, is the essential Haydn if you're just getting to know him and you want to get to know the kind of composer he was, the range of what he could do. And I think you'll be extremely, extremely happy with this selection. And there's so much more to explore. My God, there's solo piano music. There are operas. There are his 6 late mass settings, which are extraordinary. There's a ton of stuff. And 107 symphonies and 68 and a half string quartets. It's a lifetime. It's a lifetime. So there's no rush. Start with this and just go where your own inclinations lead you. I just guarantee that you'll never be bored and you will never be disappointed if you just listen with an open mind and let the music speak to you. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care.